What the hot topic today is storm-proof finances. My name is Maureen Reyes, and I am the Vice President of Business Development for AKAM. And I am pleased to have with me today for our program, Erin Nickerson, Director of Sales for URI. Good afternoon. And before we jump in, I just want to give you general house rules. There's a question button down function in the Zoom toolbar. So if you have any questions during the webinar, please put them in there. We will do our best. We will at the end of the webinar, we will go ahead and open up for questions. Typically, a lot of questions get answered during the presentation, so be patient with us, and we are thrilled to get started. So, Erin,
Awesome. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Erin Nickerson. As Maureen said, I'm the Director of Sales for Unlimited Restoration, and we are a licensed general contractor that specializes in emergency services. Maureen asked me to talk to everybody on this call today on one of my favorite topics, and I don't think we speak about it enough when it comes to hurricane season, is how do we really financially prepare for storm season? Because there's a lot of things that we can control prior to the hurricane actually hitting our property. And hopefully, we have a very calm season like last year and the past few years here on the east coast of Florida. And God bless those folks on the west coast. So let's get started. Again, I'm Erin. You all know Maureen. She was just on the call. Some things we're going to discuss today, why we're here, the effects that hurricanes have, because in order to financially prepare for them, we have to understand what can actually happen. We're going to talk about assessing potential costs, building emergency reserves, your insurance coverage and how to review that, establishing vendor agreements for post-storm response, which arguably prior to your planning is the most important aspect of your hurricane planning project, as well as mitigation and then reconstruction after the storm. As Maureen said before, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free throughout this presentation to put your questions in there. I will try to answer them live as we go if they pertain to the topic that we're on. And if I can't do it while we're going through this, we'll do that at the end. So why are we here? You're all here because you're actively involved in managing and maintaining a property, whether a board member or a property manager. You have a fiduciary responsibility to better prepare your property this year than you've ever done for storm season. And during storm season, it's not just the hurricanes that we have problems with. We have rainy season. It could be a Tuesday afternoon where we get 42 inches of rain like we did 3 years ago in Fort Lauderdale, and the infrastructure of the city couldn't sustain all that water. So we have to have financial controls in place to help assist you with making educated decisions when these disasters do happen. I'm going to show you a quick little video. This is actually Fort Myers Beach during Hurricane Ian. One of my condo buildings had a condo commando staying in the building, and they were what we call a prepper. They put a video on the outside of their condo building, and this is exactly on Fort Myers Beach of how the storm came in and destroyed the beach. So I
Erin,
showed this for a little shock and awe factor because it's real life, and I promise that this happens. We may not have happened on the East Coast in a very long time, but you're looking at the fourth floor of this condominium building. So that's about 50 feet in the air because they have underground parking as their first floor level. So
Erin, and this is so impactful because I remember last year during hurricane, again, providing this education for ACAM and for you from URI is extremely important. We want to make sure our boards are well prepared, our managers are well prepared, because when hurricane happens, it happens. It's now the true time that you really prepare. I remember you shared this video in our last webinar from last year of the hurricane when we only discussed about insurance, the factoring in insurance, but it's extremely impactful, and I'm glad you brought this back to the table.
And I'm glad you bring up the insurance component of it because that is one of the biggest financial components of preparing for storm season. And we're going to dive deep into that in a few more slides. I'm going to speed up this video so you can see. You see that house that was at basically the first telephone pole at the end of this video? It's gone. Imagine what other damage happened to this condo building. I'll tell you offline if you have any questions. So Some big statistics to really understand. Florida's been impacted with 8 out of the 10 most costly hurricanes in the history of the United States. We don't get hit by large scale hurricane losses in a long time. It can really lull the membership into a false sense of security. And I need to update my numbers on this slide, but in 2023, roughly 637,000 people moved from out of Florida to Florida. So imagine between Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County, how many people have never actually even ever seen the impacts of a hurricane hitting our coast? So, with that in mind, this year, we really need to make sure that we're getting the right information to our membership, their responsibilities versus our responsibilities, and really financially planning better than you ever have. So, in order to prepare for storm season, we got to understand what the large effects of the hurricane are. The four biggest effects are your high winds, your storm surge, flooding, and tornadoes. So, I'm going to roll through these super quickly. So, how we classify a hurricane is through the category of wind. So, a tropical depression, you can see my screen is 38 miles per hour or less, jumps up to Cat 1 at 74 miles, and so on and so forth. Why I bring this up, which is so important, is as a part of your planning process as well, is that you to remember your on-site teams also need to prepare their homes. And you should have everybody off property and hunkered down at 45-mile-an-hour winds. That's when the governor deems the roads not safe any longer. So it's important to pay attention to the wind speed. And it's important to understand the difference between a couple things in our insurance policies. And we'll get there in a few more slides. So storm surge is actually, so if we have a 3 foot wave, it is the additional water on top of that 3 foot wave that's attributed to the hurricane winds. And wind isn't the biggest factor when it comes into hurricane losses. What the biggest factor is when we think hurricane damage, the number one thing we're always trying to protect is people. We're always trying to protect, we can replace property, we can fix property, we can't fix people. And storm surge is the highest loss of life, and wind is not. But storm surge also has the most amount of damage in a lot of situations. The most costly hurricanes of all time, Hurricane Katrina, caused $160 billion in damages and over 1,800 deaths, with storm surge from 25 to 28 feet. Hurricane Ian, the number is still moving right now. We're at $113 billion in damages. So there's just two perspectives to see how much money these storms actually create. So when it comes to assessing the potential costs at your property, we always remember property damage. That's your high winds, your flooding, extensive harm to residential and commercial structure, including roof, windows, and foundations. One thing we don't always account for that we need to think about is temporary housing costs. Now, when we're talking individual association policies, that's not under your policy. And just to understand the insurances, I'm a big advocate on this, Maureen. I know you are too. If you live in a condominium or co-op building, it's not a matter of if you're going to experience water damage, it's when. If you do not have an HO6, and that's the individual unit owner policy, you're essentially self-insuring. You're going to pay for all of your damages to put your unit back together, minus the association's structural responsibility. So the association policy, it works in tandem with the individual HO6 policy. And in the individual HO6 policy, that's where the temporary housing costs reside. That is never under the association's policy, even if the association has not been able to structurally get the building sound. It's still an HO6 coverage. So if you don't have insurance, that's a cost that you're going to need to put yourself in and realize I could be out of my home for 3 to 6 months. Another part of assessing potential costs is the cleanup and debris removal. So there is some money in most insurance policies. And if you don't have it, you really need to talk to your broker for cleanup and debris removal. In most situations, especially for my HOAs, my condominiums that are those low to mid rise that may be large scale, it's not going to be enough money for all of the debris
Erin,
that
and
happens at your property. Yeah.
yes, and Erin, again, One of the key things that we do here in ACAM, we have a risk management director, that takes care of all the insurance. We did again, like I said, we did a webinar last year with him, with Brian and Tom and the team. So, but more importantly, it's very important that you understand your coverages, especially in the HOA land, because you might say, wait, well, it was just a hurricane. We were not in the eye, but guess what? Oak trees are heavy. I mean, I was in, what year was it? I think it was in 2017 that
17.
Irma was 17. So,
Yep.
right. I had 450 oaks that went down in an HOA. We're talking a huge HOA, but it's a 450. And those, that debris, obviously the coverage, it was never going to be 100%. So this is where your financial implication of planning ahead needs to be done very thoughtfully, because obviously you're in a hurricane, it already happened, you have all the debris, but the debris is not covered 100% with your insurance. So you have to make sure you understand your policies, and then again, plan the most important, like plan correctly and know your contracts. But I'm jumping in a little bit forward on your presentation, but it happens and it's real.
Absolutely. You brought up
And it's real.
something that I love to talk about. For HOA specifically, you need to understand responsibility levels of that debris. In an individual homeowner's yard, if they have trees, is that your responsibility for removal and cleanup, or is that their responsibility? And if it's an individual homeowner's responsibility to clean up the debris in their yard, I want you to remember that as an association, you have a massive amount of buying power. Because I guarantee you, in a post-storm response situation, that if you don't have an agreement with a landscaping company or a contract with a landscaping company, they're not coming. And you need to know where you fall in their list. And we're going to speak a little bit more about contracts in a few more slides. So I don't want to get ahead of myself. But as a part of the cleanup and debris removal, it's important for you to know that in a lot of these situations, you may need generators. You may need gas for cutting down trees. You may need other items in order to get that removal process happening, which all come at a cost. Business interruption is a big part of your recovery process. So if you're an on-site manager and your office is completely wiped out, you have no computer, you have no internet, you have no electricity, where is your manager working from? You need to have a plan in place. So when your business is interrupted, maybe the manager is going to be on site from this time in the morning till this time in the afternoon, and then they're going to go home and start the communication tree. Or maybe your board is involved, and for especially if you're a portfolio managed property on this call, it is even more important that you have homeowners that are going to be a part of this recovery process. Maybe you have a hurricane committee, maybe you have an insurance committee, but it's really making sure that each person has an assigned task and that they're executed as a team. It's one of the biggest things where I see my properties either fail miserably or excel because they had that plan in place and everybody executed their jobs.
Yeah.
Business interruption doesn't just affect the day-to-day operation. We have a lot of supply chain issues when a hurricane hits a localized area. So it's important prior to a storm coming to hit us that you have the proper supplies at your property. I'm not going to go deep down the rabbit hole with that one because I know Maureen has checklists. I have checklists, and we can get that all to you after the call. Another really big thing that's important is really understanding that the association has a fiduciary responsibility to protect the asset. So after the storm hits, if you have blown out windows, blown out doors, who is going to be boarding up that windows? Is that the association? Is it a third party vendor? But the structural integrity of the building is the association's responsibility, not to have continued work or continued damage happen. The last thing that we need to talk about in assessing potential costs is the long-term property devaluation. Properties with a history of storm damage decline in the market value and affect retail potential and insurance premiums. The west coast of Florida has been very unfortunate, from Fort Myers Beach to Captiva Island to those barrier islands over there, where they're the type of insurances that they're allowed to get now for flood and wind are completely different than what we are having here on the east coast of Florida where I'm located. So it's important to understand that these hurricanes can devastate. And even I've had a lot of condos in Fort Myers Beach that have been bought by developers and they've dissolved the condo because they were not financially prepared to take a Cat 5 hit and they didn't have enough money to put the building back together. And when we sustain over 50% damage to our buildings, we have to bring it up to current building code, no matter what. And we're going to talk a lot more about insurance in a few more slides because I love to talk about ordinance and law. And I know you do too, Maureen. So these numbers, you are not holding me to them in any way, shape, or form. Residential properties are very different than commercial properties, and commercial properties are what everybody has on this call. You can be an HOA, you can be a condo, you can be a co-op, but you are a business, and how you are classified is in a commercial property sense. So repair costs really start with an evaluation of the structural integrity of the building. And I think it's important for us to understand the two sides to storm water damage. And this really will lead us into our insurance part of this call. So it's important to understand that there's two sides to water. You have the water that comes out of the sky that gets into your building envelope. Maybe you had a roof leak through windows and doors. That's your wind-driven rain. Once that water hits the ground and then rises, rising water is considered flood water. Floodwater is considered category 3 grossly contaminated water. So in the event of a hurricane, we are not, and we have floodwater, we're talking about floodwater, we are not drying out the drywall. We are removing and replacement, and you'll hear the term 2-foot flood cut. That's our industry standard. So if I come into Maureen's building, her beautiful building on Fort Lauderdale Beach, and they have floodwater across the entire first floor of her building, where the last water wick line is, we're going 2 foot beyond that to do the flood cut and then finishing off the mitigation portion of that project. It could be drying out the substrate if that's applicable, or cleaning and decontaminating the area. But I want to be very clear about floodwater because we are not drying that type of water. And in most situations, if we have floodwater coming into the buildings, we're going to have some sort of power disruption issue. And before you turn the power back on ever, you're going to have your electrician come out there because salt water and electrical just don't mix.
Erin, and really quick, because
So
this
one more,
is
yeah,
and really quick, this is important because again, the duties, right? Who's responsible? And I think again, we have a lot of our managers here in the call and their CEUs. It might be their first rodeo. Maybe they have not done, but it's important that it's a clear understanding of who's responsible and who needs to do it. A manager cannot be taking the responsibility, right, of going and cutting and moving and doing. You have to hire an expert because of documentations. So I think, many times the board is like, oh, no, I'll do it. No, 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 no. So I think it's the responsibility, government, it has to have a clear path. And walk me through of your personal experience, what has
sure.
happened if they take, because it happens, it's the reality, it does. But what are the cause and effect if you bypass this simple issue?
Sure. So as community associations, you should never be dealing with category 3 grossly contaminated. We call it black water. How I want you to think about that type of water is calling it liability water. If this water is cleaned up incorrectly and it results in secondary damages or potentially making somebody sick, the association absorbs that liability. And when I use the word liability, that's a lawsuit from your individual unit owners suing the association because your maintenance team cleaned it up incorrectly and put the drywall back. Hurricanes need to be done by licensed professionals, and your contracts should be in place prior to hurricane season. Have more than one contract, and it's really in agreement for post-storm response because you're not exchanging money as a part of the agreement. It's to put a plan in place with your trusted contractor that says, this is our price list, this is our protocol specific to your property, and setting the expectation that I just set with all of you saying, if
Mm-hmm.
floodwater is here, we're cutting it out. Whether you have power or not, that is the protocol. And then we're going to evaluate all the other units for wind-driven rain. So it's really making sure that there's a clear understanding on both sides of the fence from the association and from your contractor as to this is the route we're taking, having all the proper parties involved. And arguably one of the most important things is the financial side of it. Do you know what your deductible is? And we're going to talk insurance in a few more slides. The slide I have in front of you right now, I'm going to send to everybody on this call. These are some really great tools and programs that you can evaluate your specific building's risk based off of your location. FEMA also has a methodology for determining eligible permanent work for large construction projects post-disaster. These are great tools if you want to go down the rabbit hole with your specific property. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this. I do want to say something about FEMA though. FEMA is the last place that you want your property to be when a hurricane hits. We want to make sure that you're properly insured before that so you're not dealing in those situations, as well as your individual unit owners as well. So building emergency reserves, and I'm going to lean on you a lot on this one because I know you have some very serious opinions, but they're so important to have your reserves in proper order, especially going into hurricane season. And my biggest gripe, and I always believe that you should have a line of credit or a loan prior to hurricane season of available funds to you, because I'm not the only contractor you're going to need in a post-storm situation, and cash is king. But average after the two hurricanes that hit the Tampa Bay, Sarasota area almost 2 years ago now, it was taking 45 to 60 days for loans and lines of credits with multiple different banks that I work with for them to even process those to be able to continue their mitigation and their repair process. So think about that from an individual resident standpoint, because the associations that we were working with were not properly funding their reserves. They did not have healthy operating budgets. They were applying for loans. I couldn't even start repair work for my worst case community was almost 6 months because they were going through a loan process. So they had 5 buildings on this particular property and everybody was out for 6 months.
Yeah.
It was longer than that, but that's the gap in the repair time.
And that's why, again, I wanted to bring this value of the hurricane, but with an eye of finance, right? You said it critical. I wanted two things here that are important, and from your slide before. One, you have to have agreements with your contractors, your vendors, your experts, everyone you need to. But most important, those contractors need to also understand the city requirements, because not because they're super big or national, they're going to have be allowed in Miami Beach. Miami Beach will stop them and say, why are you here? What's the contract? They have credentials, etc. So you, first of all, you have to know where you are, right? You have to be a vetted vendor, not just by the association, but by the city, because when a hurricane
Correct.
comes in, they don't allow anyone, even management needs to be registered and have their credentials. So again, emergency plan, you have to have a clear path. Second, financials. You hit the nail. You have to either have been reserving, right? And it's a big deal
Mhm.
with everything that we have, the SIRS and all that. But you should, best practice, have a line item, for these types of emergency, and a credit line. Those are the best, because what happens is, you said it, you want to apply for a loan, they're not going to go ahead and give you a loan after hurricane. You're going to have to pass a special assessment. There's so many items that needs to be in place for them to, like any bank, even if you have the best relationships, you have to walk in already with a clear plan financially in place, because when a hurricane hits, the vendors need to get paid, and you could have great relationships, but if you don't have, a plan in place for paying, then that's when the delays happen. And that's when your pool is not going to be open for another 6 months. That's when your roof will be, your clubhouse will be shut down, and you won't enjoy your amenities that you pay so much for, right? That's when everything happens. And you will have the
You said something that I want to harp on, Maureen. So, and I give
these are
this
life
the most realistic.
situations.
So what she's saying is true. So the one thing that if you take nothing else away from this call, I want you to plan for your deductibles. So when we're talking deductibles, you have those two policies that I was talking about. You have your flood policy, your rising groundwater, and then you have your wind driven rain. Your flood policy And if you don't have a flood policy and you live in Florida, you really need to talk to your broker on the importance of it. And I have a couple people on this call right now that I'm talking to you. Um, it is nominal compared to the costs of flood water damage. So what I see average is $1,250 to about 10, 15, $20,000 for barrier islands for their deductible for a flood event at your property. My bill is always going to be higher than that after a hurricane. Please get flood insurance. Most of you are going to be required to have it because you're in flood zones, but just because you're not in a flood zone does not mean that flood water won't happen to your community. So, second thing that you said that I really want to talk about is the deductible for the wind. So, I did some simple math. I'm calculator right here. If your asset is $50 million and your deductible, we'll call it 5% average right now. Some of you are down to 3, and congratulations. You're looking at $2.5 million that you have to have before in damages before you can even file a claim. So my question to everybody on this call is going to be, how are you going to pay for your deductible when you have large scale damage? How are you going to fund that $2.5 million that you have to pay to your contractor before your insurance policy even kicks in with all the damages you have? That's really the question that we want to get to. And that goes back to Maureen saying line of credit prior to the storm. If you need help with that, Maureen's a great person, has a lot of connections with a lot of different banks that she can kind of steer you in the right direction for your specific properties needs. Because not every bank is for every property. Right,
Mm-hmm.
Maureen?
100%. A
Awesome.
100%.
So going back to building emergency reserves and lines of credits, it's really important that you understand that it gives lenders confidence. So if you do need that line of credit, again, we are advocating for pre-storm, but for post-storm situations, it is so important that you have the right documentation in place. I had this one building in on the west coast of Florida, and they could not get their a loan because their financials were not clean. Because you need 3 years of financial for when you're going to apply, amongst a whole lot of other things. But it's so important that your financials are tight. And that your property manager and your management company, or if you're self-managed, you have a really good handle on what that should be, knowing what your delinquents are. Um,
Delinquency, that's key. Cash flow, delinquency, that they're not going to consider you.
Absolutely. What other things have you seen banks deny from not having clean financials?
It's basically that. It's again knowing the history of the association. They have a list, again, a checklist of things that will, but one of the most impactful ones is controlling your delinquency. You can't have over, I think it's like a 10%. But you can't have over that because if not, if you don't have a control collection policy and if you don't have money coming in, they're not going to give you a loan. It's very hard. So those are, I think, that are very critical that, we will facilitate, we provide the value every single day to our clients and to potential ones. Again, we're added resources, but definitely you think, oh no, I'm in a good position, but then your delinquency you have 30-40% of people not paying. Bank is it's going to be very difficult that they're going to go ahead and pay you, give you a credit line of 2 million, 3 million, or whatever your deductible is.
And I think you just said something because I had a flash to one of my buildings in downtown West Palm. I have a building that because they have a high rate of investor owners and rentals in the building, they can't get a line of credit or a loan. So if you're that building on this call, this conversation becomes increasingly more important. How are we going to get the funds to mitigate our damages? Because you have an obligation to not only the community, but in your insurance policy that you must mitigate from further damage. So your building cannot sustain more damage after the hurricane has passed. What's your plan if you are that metro building with a high rental volume rate? Are you special assessing everybody post storm and that's the path you're going to go down? We probably need to set a pretty clear expectation for the community to, if we're not going to plan for this upfront, here's the consequences of our actions and be very transparent about what that looks like. And I'm sure you've seen that in a couple communities as well, Maureen, that you guys have taken over. So talking again about building emergency reserves, we really like to see an annual operating budget percentage of 10% in your operating budget for reserves. Obviously, we know that there's new laws with the requirements of reserve studies. even if you don't fall under that requirement, we really want you to have up-to-date reserve studies following the Florida state statute for condominiums. If you are an HOA, it better helps evaluate your potential risk, and we can plan financially for your specific association and give you best practices. But if we're dealing with outdated data, outdated reserve studies, it does nothing good for you, because the valuation of your property from 10 years ago is not the valuation for 2026. And I give this example. I have a building on Singer Island that they've needed a new roof for about 4 years. And they said they kept kicking it down the road, kicking the can down the road. And when they went out to bid 4 years ago, it was $1.2 million for their roof. Now it's almost double that. So if they did this project a couple years back, it would have been 50% of the cost. So that's kind of the analogy when it comes to evaluating what is your asset worth as a whole. And we want to have the best data we possibly can so we can plan in the best way.
Yep, and that's best practices. Make sure you reserve. Again, it's not required, and I'm sure the Florida statute and the department will be continue to consider it. But yes, planning, 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 and that's why even jumping in, you have to be financially savvy and put yourself in the worst case scenario. That's the bottom line. It's put yourself and work with your experts to make sure you can go ahead and deliver the services that you don't run out of cash. You don't run out of cash.
Absolutely. So when it comes to insurance deductibles as it relates to your reserves, I do like to see you budget for your deductible in some capacity. If you don't use it, the money's there. You can pool your reserves and kind of rob Peter to pay Paul in some situations, depending on the statute you fall under. But it's so important that we understand the difference between the flood deductible, which is minor. Like, if you take nothing else from this, please get flood insurance, because in the event that you need to use it, there's a lot more money there. The other thing that we didn't talk about actually as it pertains to insurance is for the individual homeowner size in your individual HO6 policy for condominium and co-op, so statute 718 and 719, you have what's called loss assessment coverage. I don't think we talk about this enough. It's $2,400. It's standard across all policies. You can get more insurance for loss assessment coverage. And everybody asked me, Maureen, how much should I have? And my answer is always going to be, how much can you afford? How much coverage do you want when you need it? So it's something to talk about with your individual policies as well, because it's a great tool when it comes to special assessments after an insurable loss.
Mm. One of the things that it's also important, again, it's talking to your stakeholders, ensuring that they understand. We've done in many situations when we take, especially when we take over an association and they might have very low, reserves or your insurance. We like to bring the agent in front so they communicate to the owners and the stakeholders the responsibilities. Again, how much is enough is let the expert guide that homeowner say, wait a minute, you should get your rental insurance, and this is what actually the association is responsible for. So always bringing our theme is always bringing and educating our membership, our owners. It's always a great form to provide the information, right?
Absolutely. And I'm going to echo you. Bring in the experts. Bring in the people that can help guide you and help make your membership have good informed decisions. And that brings me to my next thing, risk assessments. Risk assessments are one of the most important things that you can do for your property, and involving those experts. So bringing in your broker, your management company, your restoration partner, there's other type of risk assessments that can be performed as well. And you need that risk assessment for your specific property, not HOAs as a whole or condos in general. It is knowing your specific property details, like your flood zone, the historical data that you have. Last time a water damage incident or a hurricane or a microburst hit your specific property, and then you adjust your reserve levels to that risk assessment accordingly. So Maureen will call me and say, hey, Erin, I'm trying to organize a risk assessment on May 1st for XYZ property. I've got my attorney, my insurance agent, my team here. We're going to prepare for hurricane season operationally, and most importantly, collect the data so we can prepare financially.
Correct. We have to have a collaboration on point.
Absolutely.
Everyone there.
Next slide. All right. Last slide on emergency reserves. So we already talked about requiring regular reserve studies. Again, we like to follow Florida state statute for condo because it's progressive. And I think you'll agree with me that eventually in HOA land, they catch up. So we follow those best practices.
Yes.
Establishing clear policies is arguably one of the most important things for you to do financially and to understand the process post storm, what that looks like, who is allowed to move money. And if you are distributing money post storm in your reserves, please, please, please involve your attorney. Please, please, please involve your attorney for all post storm damage, especially when it comes to allocation for money, because you may have specific things that are in your documents that go above and beyond Florida state statute that you're unaware of. Monitoring your reserve levels, super important. Making sure you're investing wisely as well. And I have to say this because this is real life, and you're probably going to laugh, Maureen. I think I've told you this before. I had a hurricane client on the West Coast 2 years ago who invested the association's money in Bitcoin and was having trouble getting it out to be able to use it for post hurricane repairs. Can't make it up. That is not a good practice, by the way. And lastly, transparent communication on financials. It's so important that prior to the storm, you're transparent on the position the association is taking operationally and financially and what reserves and money are available to the community. And if there's not a whole lot that you can do before that because you can't get a line of credit, you can't do that, set the association up and say, here's our financial position. You get our monthly statements in our board meetings. We do not have enough money in our reserves to cover our deductible. Therefore, if we get hit by a hurricane, we will have a special assessment. I think the more transparent and honest and open you are as a community, the better the recovery is on the other side. My favorite topic. For the record, I am not a licensed insurance broker, but if you need direction in this, both Maureen and myself will get you to the right people. So we talked
100%.
about, yeah, I always like to preface that because I nerd out when it comes to insurance. I read policies every day. I have policies reviewed, but understanding the basics are really, really important. So wind, we spoke about what wind is, and your deductibles are usually right now 3 to 7%, and it's decreasing. So that's the big deductible you need to plan for financially. And then you have flood. And flood insurance is run through the NFIP, which is a National Flood Insurance Program. It is a government program. It is not specific to the state of Florida. And I bring this up importantly because during a flood event, an insurable flood event, it actually gives the condominium and co-ops more coverage, more responsibility inside of the unit than a normal day-to-day property loss. It's 14 items and they change it whenever they want. So a couple things just off the top of my head that are covered under the association policy for flood water damage only. This is not a normal property damage claim. Our lower kitchen cabinetry damaged by flood water. What is also covered under the association policy is refrigerators and dishwashers, but not washer or dryers. So it's very specific, which is why I encourage everybody on this call to get with their broker prior to hurricane season and go over your flood policy and your wind policy and understanding what is covered and what is not covered. One of the coverages that I don't see commonly covered, and a lot of condominiums make the mistake in doing after a hurricane, is getting a generator because theirs is no longer working. It was damaged by floodwaters, dropping a generator on their property to power some part or maybe all, which is uncommon, parts of their building so they can start the post-storm recovery. That generator is generally excluded. I love a generator. For me, it's a money printer. If you want a generator on your property, I will put it there all day long, but understand that it is not common for your condo or co-op policy or HOA policy to cover that specific to a hurricane. It's unfortunate, but that's one thing you're going to want to talk about with your broker. Are we covered for this? Because that's the biggest misstep I see associations make, and it is a huge cost to have a generator sit on your property day in and day out. When we're talking about insurance coverages, you're only as good as your policy allows you to be. And why do I say it that way? Because when you ask me to be your preferred contractor that's going to come service you post storm, and you say, hey, Erin, you're going to bill the insurance company. I'm going to bill the insurance company what it takes to restore your property. That does not mean that you have all the coverages in your policy to cover my bill. So it's important that you sit down with your restoration contractor and your broker and you say, okay, what is the potential risk? We got the data. We did our risk survey of the property. Is there anything here that could possibly be not covered? Is there an additional coverage that we could get that would increase the dollar amount so we're not paying out of pocket on those big wind claims? So understanding your coverage limits and what is and what is not covered is arguably the most important part about the insurance policy. And if your broker is not sitting down with you at least once a year to have that conversation, you just seriously consider going somewhere else.
Yeah.
Again, we talked, go ahead.
And Aaron, it's again looking at a very practical sense of this. It is so critical for the board and the management team to understand the details of what is covered because the financial impact it's very bad if you don't understand it and you assume that that's going to be covered 100% and you assume like you cannot assume you have to really understand your policy. Like I said, we ACAM has a risk management department. We have those difficult conversations. Brian and Tom are phenomenal. They talk directly with the board, with the broker. We facilitate all of it because the more educated you are and the better you understand, the better you're going to be positioning your association for a successful hurricane season at the end of the day. The other thing is, I would definitely ensure that once the board fully understands the manager, let the stakeholders know as well. Have your broker come in and provide this information and have the questions asked. And what happens if we're category 5 and what happens in the clubhouse and what happens with the trees? The insurance agent, remember, they are there year round. It's not once a year when the renewal comes in. No, the agent is there responsible year round. So they can go ahead and provide this information to the membership. So again, it's everyone's value, it's everyone's asset at the end of the day. It's not the I mean, obviously responsibility of the board, but your insurance agent should be talking to your membership and helping facilitate and really educating them exactly what the policies run.
I think I believe in scare tactics. You know me at this point. So some of the most common things that I see that are not insured under policies that if you are a condo or co-op, especially if you're on a barrier island that you're going to want to check are your outdoor amenities. That
Mhm.
includes your pool
Yep.
deck, bocce courts I see destroyed, tennis courts, pickleball courts, not having those covered under policies are one of the most common things that I see in post-storm situations. I don't know if you remember Hurricane Nicole happened right after Hurricane Ian on the West Coast, and my Daytona Beach properties, literally on the ocean, they didn't have coverage for their pools, and their pools fell into the beach, fell into the ocean. Can you even fathom that type of a special assessment for a 150 unit building? Like that's astronomical, not to mention all the other things that they had wrong. So think about your amenities, especially the outdoor amenities. Those need to be properly insured for hurricane. Think about your pool equipment. I think about the equipment that you have on the first floor of your buildings, on your roofs, your electrical rooms, making sure that those things are included and having your broker physically walk the property with you. So important. So important. I think I beat to death the flood insurance specifics. If anybody has any questions on that, I'm happy to take that offline. Um, Insurance coverage review. So prior to hurricanes, we want a policy review. Especially if you are going from self-managed to management company, self-manage, changing management companies, changing boards. I think that having a third party that did not write the policy, review it. Maybe it's a different broker. Maybe it's your trusted whomever that has a license to interpret the policy. Look for holes. And there's always going to be something. We're coming from such a hard market into a soft market. So now is the time where because your premiums are going down, your deductibles are going down, it's the time to think about adding more insurance that may not have been affordable before. which brings me to my favorite insurance called ordinance and law. So ordinance and law, if you think about it, the basic function of why I like it, if you're an older building, you definitely want this. But even if you're a newer building, it's also equally important. How I like to think of it as gap insurance. So when your building gets over 50% sustained damages, maybe you've got roofs, mechanical rooms, pump rooms, all of the high ticket dollar item stuff, it has to come up to new building code. Think about windows and doors, right? Not every time you're responsible as an association, but it is structural to a hurricane. So if you have jalousie windows at your property, you now have to put back in hurricane impact because that's the new building code. I think about my older condominium buildings that have been around since the 50s, 60s, 70s. You may have aluminum wiring in your building that now has to come up to building code, and that is a huge, huge expense to rewire a building from aluminum to our current code. I then think about the ever changing world of elevators, right? We just had to go through modernization, door lock monitoring, and there's one additional code upgrade that's going to be happening in 2028. So that coverage, if you don't have it, it's worth the conversation with your broker now to say, is this affordable? Can we get this? I will tell you, if you are with Citizens Insurance, it is not available as a coverage. And I highly recommend you listen to your broker or have me walk your property because we want to get you out of Citizens. That's the insurer of last everything. And there's so many good companies coming into the marketplace right now, creating this really great, almost like cutthroat. And that's at the carrier level. That's not at the broker level. We want to create the story for your property when your brokers are going to the carriers and make you more desirable. So you get those better coverages. So you get those better deductibles. So a lot of the preventative maintenance is going to help have your story be better told. So review your policies with your agent, get a third party to also review them. You can send them to Maureen at AKAM and she'll have her team look at them as well. Documentation is your key to property resilience and success, and it starts pre. We need to know what we have on property and the dollar amounts that are associated with what we as an association are responsible for managing, maintaining, and insuring. So what does that look like at the association level? The structural integrity of your building, first and foremost, right? What is the cost of total replacement? And then your breakdown on your reserve study. What does our maintenance look like on all of our mechanicals? So you think your roof at a minimum, once a year, I want a licensed roofer walking your roof and giving you a report that says you're either in good shape or these are the things you need to fix before the hurricane comes, because that gives you your pre-loss condition. So if we do get hit by a storm, you can say, hey, I had advanced roofing out here. They said these things were wrong. We fixed them. Our roof is great. Now our roof peeled back because we got hit by a Cat 5 storm. We have all this water intrusion in the building. Here's our maintenance records, and it helps speed along the process of that claim. It also gives you your benchmarks. So it's really important that you have a comprehensive inventory of what you own as an asset. I also encourage my individual unit owners to do the same. So if I have a multi-million dollar condo in Sunny Isles, I'm looking at what do I own in my apartment and am I insured properly for that? So do I have expensive artwork? Is that covered under my policy? And so it's the same mentality that we want to push down to our individual unit owners as well. Because again, I'm going to keep repeating this, you are only as good as your insurance policy allows you to be in a post-storm recovery situation. After the hurricane, we talked about emergency funds. I think I beat that with a dead horse as well. But after the hurricane, reporting in a timely fashion keeps you in compliance with your insurance policy. If you have a failure to report, there is literal legislation that will deny your claim. And there's that language in your policy. Please review that with your broker. Notifying your insurer of any damage as soon as possible is one of the most important things you could do. And after the last two hurricanes that hit the west coast of Florida 2 weeks apart, I have a serious soapbox on what I want you to do now. So everywhere outside of condo land, USA, HOA land, in commercial business settings, whether it's commercial property, hospitals, hotels, municipalities, school systems, my clients in those sectors have a third party adjuster assigned permanently to their policy. And I want to explain what this third party adjuster, and there's several brokerages that do that already for you and have an internal claims team. But the vast majority of associations do not have a third party adjuster. And a third party adjuster, you do not pay for this person as an individual association. It is the carrier that pays for this person because this person is working on behalf of your carrier. So if you have Heritage and Sampo are paying this person to come out after the storm and evaluate all the damage to their property. The reason why we want them on your policy prior to the storm is so we know who we're talking to. We can build a relationship and include them in our hurricane planning process. The relationship aspect of it is everything. There's a lot of great companies out there. And if you want some referrals, Engel Martin's great, McLaren's great, and there's so many other people that are awesome. So I highly recommend reach out to me, reach out to your broker. I'm happy to give you a little bit more detail in that, but it's about building the relationship prior to the loss. Maureen, I know you wanted to say
Yeah, and
something.
this is why again I was very passionate about hosting this webinar because these are things that you need to do before June 1st.
Absolutely.
Get with
And
that adjuster. Like these are the way, this is how you educate yourself correctly in the board and be prepared.
yeah.
So
So
yeah.
and this is why I bring this up. I had an association in Sarasota. They had two high-rise towers, and then they had three buildings of low-rise condos. So total, we had five buildings on the property. So when the hurricane hit, first one comes in, I've got flood damage in all five buildings. That means I'm filing five claims. That was a flood event. Then the second hurricane came in 2 weeks later. It was a wind driven rain event, no flood water that time. I had to file five more claims because they're two separate storms. So I have 10 claims on this one property, and the carrier and the wind carrier and the flood carrier sent me out five different adjusters for each. So I had 10 adjusters at one property that I was working with on 10 different claims. So, what do we do to prevent that? That's chaos, like absolute chaos to have that many different entities that you're dealing with and trying to restore your property. I was able to work with the broker and the carriers to get it down to three adjusters total for the 10 claims. But that was a whole process that I had to exercise after the storm, which delays everything in you getting paid by the carrier. So that's something new. A lot of people probably haven't heard that on this call before. If you can get that accomplished and try to get it done at renewal, that's really the best time to get that person assigned permanently. And ask your broker, who do you guys work with as an agency that you like? If they don't have anybody, give me a call. I will give you a couple different options. Go and interview them. It doesn't cost you any money as an association. Next thing, when we're talking about adjusters, there is the other side of the world, and that's a public adjuster. A public adjuster, there's a time and a place for them. That's why the profession exists. When you're using a public adjuster in condominium co-op or HOA, it is crucial that you're working with a public adjuster that understands Florida state statute and understands the roles and responsibilities association versus the individual unit owner. What happens after a hurricane, all the adjusters and restoration contractors come from all over the country down to Florida and they storm chase. So it's really important that if you are going to be using that type of an adjuster, and remember, a public adjuster represents you, the individual, as an association or a unit owner. They don't represent the carrier. If you are going to do that, pre-vet them. Make sure you have a plan in place. They know your property. They walk the property. And that's part of the preparedness process. And like I said,
Mhm.
there's a time and a place for public adjusters. But it's important that we have that set up in before.
Yeah, no, and again, and we offer that as an arm, right? Because there's there's always that oh no, we don't need that, we have insurance, but actually the public, those adjusters, that's solely their responsibility to really help the coverages, the financial, the extras, how you document correctly, how the video, the pictures are great, but if you're doing videos, like little details, even the managers can make a mistake by saying something in the video and providing it to the, so there's so much detail. So again, we work with many adjusters, and happy to provide the resources. I mean, we just did an educational webinar not too far ago, with Matt. We have, from Global Pro, which is a great partner for these situations. So I know, Erin, we have anyone that you need
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
extra. We're here to help. Again, I've already been chatting our emails, but it's important, this topic.
Yeah, and I think it's increasingly important for those communities that are large scale, high risk, barrier islands, these little details like getting an assigned adjuster to your insurance policy. These are the details that make an extreme difference in your post-storm recovery. And not all contractors are created equal. You really need to do your due diligence. And that brings me to our contracts. So pre-negotiated contracts are required. I use that word required for post-storm recovery. So there's two sides. There's contracts, which are an exchange of money. So contracts bind you because there's that exchange. So your contracts that you're going to have in place post-storm, landscaper, first and foremost, if I can't get on your property to help restore and get you back to your pre-loss condition, I got to move on to the next person, right? So that's your number one contract. So that's your landscaping for my large scale associations, condos, HOAs. More importantly, my barrier islands, anybody that's on the intercoastal, anybody near large bodies of water on this call. How am I getting the sand out of your parking area so I can get my trucks into your parking
Yep.
area? I
And
can't get on your
remember,
property.
you
Mhm.
have to be registered with the city. Many
Correct.
cities won't even allow you in the island. Many cities will block and say absolutely not. You could say, "Oh, I have a contract," and they're like, "No, you don't even have the credentials to be in here. Go home."
Absolutely. You have
That's
to
a
be registered.
true. So again,
Mhm.
just adding to that, emphasis of how important you need to be prepared to have, that contractor, like you said, remove the sand, remove those oak trees that are blocking your roads. You have to make sure you remove everything for emergency. So again, it just triggers, but you have to make sure everyone can go to your property.
One contract in place that I don't think we think about enough is the security and safety of the community after the storm while we're in the recovery process. Security. Your property manager is not going to be available to be at your property 24/7 after the storm. They have their own homes that they need to deal with as well. So with saying that, it may, if you are, I see a lot of people, Sunny Isles, Fort Lauderdale Beach, Jupiter Island on this call. What is the security protocol if all the first floor windows and doors on your building are blown out? What's your plan? Who's standing there? Do you have a contract with a security company? Is it done by the master association? Do you have people that are going to stay on site, which I hate saying, but it's important that you have a plan for security post storm. Now, those are your contracts, right? Because there's money exchange in those and you need the plan for that. When it
Mm-hmm.
comes to restoration contractors, painting contractors, roofing contractors, we have post-storm agreements where we get your plan in place. There's no money exchanged back or forth unless there's a service, like maybe we're dropping a generator because that's the level of service you want post-storm, and we have that conversation. Or maybe there's a cost because you want me to stage all of my equipment because you want to be the number one. And I had a client in Boca come up with this. We're going to do their entire neighborhood, all four buildings, and stage all of our equipment there. But the agreement is that you're going to be on a list for post storm recovery. You need to find out where you fall on that contractor's list. And the more day to day work you do with that contractor, business sense wise, you're
Mm-hmm.
probably higher on their list. And those are the questions that you want to ask to not only your agreements, but also your contractors. So Maureen,
Yeah.
let's go through the list of contractors
Yeah.
that they need to have post-storm.
Yeah, and Erin, one quick thing that, again, because we're talking about this in a lens of financial. Those
Mhm.
contractors, you better have a good relationship paying them too. Because you can't expect the contractor to come, right, and put you in their top, five when you have been holding a check for 60, 90, or well, or a year and you have a claim. So again, it's critical, again, looking at through a financial and practical sense, that those contractors that you have, And logically, you have to make sure your attorney is reviewing those contracts, even if they're agreements for the best interest
Mhm.
of the association. But you have to pay them on time.
Thank
And
you for
I know
bringing
it
that
sounds
up.
very funny, but and you laugh, but it's true, right or
100%.
wrong.
100%. You fall very low on my list if you have a $50,000 bill, $30,000 bill, $100,000, and your AR is 120 days out. You fall very low on my list. We can have an agreement in place, but if you're not paying your bills on time or you have outstanding balances, now's the time to do the spring cleaning and get your financials in order. And that, like you said, is paying your bills on time. So glad you brought that up. That's a breath of fresh air. So we talked about now we need to know what contracts and agreements we need in place. So I said landscaping and debris removal, that includes sand, specifically my barrier islands. You need a plan for sand at your property. After that, you need your restoration contractor agreement here. You're going to need your roofer. That's roofers. And I feel like roofers and elevator companies are the two hardest contractors that inhibit my restoration of your property in a post-storm situation. So when it comes to elevator contract, you have a provision in your contract for hurricanes specifically and the time frame that they're allowed to respond in. Hold them to that. I think about the big four, and those are probably the ones that you're going to have the hardest time finding in a post-storm situation. So having a backup plan um, with maybe a more local company, just a relationship that you can build with somebody that maybe they're doing repairs for you that your big company, service company can't do in a timely fashion. You need to have a backup plan for your elevators. And I'll give you the example, my awesome property with 10 claims on the west coast of Florida, we couldn't find their elevator company. So I brought in an East Coast elevator company to come service them and get their elevators back online. Because they had a roof issue, their roof came off and I had to do a temporary solution for them. It was going to either cost them $12,000 for me to pull in a crane for one day to put my materials on the roof, or it was going to cost $18,000 for me to have labor go up 10 flights of stairs. Elevators getting back online were a lot more cost effective. So that's the reality of being able to predict when things are going wrong. So those your contractors are everything in post-storm response. And that really is how you can predict what you may need. So thinking about that, that's really the streamlined recovery process.
And being in the business that we're in, right? Again,
Mhm.
you have that emergency plan in place, your hurricane plan in place. But there's your company, our company, we have emergency numbers. It's a 1-800 number, right? So again, we
Mhm.
have the relationship. I might call your cell phone and Erin might not be able to answer me because so that your cell phone number should not be part of the emergency plan. It has to be the company's emergency plan number, right?
Right.
Because we could have the relationship that we have, but maybe Erin at that given time, cannot respond. So those are things that they're very details, but the reality is in your contract, those numbers need to be, um,
Agreed.
uh, informed. Correct.
And I want to bring this up. Partnerships and relationships are so important. And yes, my cell phone number is great. You do equally need that. You definitely need the 800 number as well. And I think when I think about how I approach hurricanes, and other restoration contractors might not do the same things that I do. I walk you through this process that you see on your screen. I sit down at your property, evaluate, get all my data points. I put out this is our scope. We talk about that scope of work, which we clearly define prior to a storm hitting. We then have activation triggers for when if the event actually does happen. And I show you these are where I'm stationing my people, my materials. This is where you're located. This is where you're going to fall on my list. This is the type of time frame that you can expect for my team's arrival. And I say this really importantly too, because my barrier islands, you guys are the last people that are going for us to be able to be allowed on the island. So why I say that, I was the first restoration contractor on Fort Myers Beach after Hurricane Ian hit because I had a contract with the local municipality. And who gets up first? Fire, life safety, and police stations. Those are the only people. Those restoration contractors are servicing those people. Those people are making the barrier island clear and clean. That means that until, and I say this in the nicest possible way, all the dead bodies are picked up, that they can clear the roadways. And I'm talking the main roadways. Not all the roadways are going to be clear on barrier islands when they start allowing people back over to the islands. It took 2.5 weeks of cleanup before any restoration contractor was allowed on Fort Myers Beach. So when you say, Erin, where do you fall on my plan? If you're on a barrier island, it has to be deemed safe by the local municipality for me even to be able to get onto the barrier island. So keep that in mind when you're talking about your hurricane planning. It's not an instantaneous thing. The hurricane passes and they're going to let you over the bridge. That's not how it works. So really setting expectations, and that's more on your unit owner side, that recovery is a process and it takes time. We're just going to control the finances and the operations prior to as much as we humanly possible can to help smooth that recovery process. Another part of my agreement in my how I set up my hurricane plan, we talk about pricing and payment terms prior to a storm. I'm going to give you my 2026 rate sheet and say, this is what a project manager costs. This is what the labor rates are. This is what the equipment costs. And we're going to agree on that prior to a hurricane happening. One of the most important things in any contract that you look at, look out for overtime costs, emergency surcharges, and make sure that you outline payment schedules. Most contractors are on a net 30. Generally speaking, you are not going to get paid by the carrier within 30 days. It's the rock and the hard place. So making sure that you are financially solvent is a really big deal post storm. And knowing that the carrier can delay. And I've got a couple of clients that are still going back and forth with the carrier from the two hurricanes that hit the West Coast over almost 2 years ago now, over 2 years ago. Another thing with your vendor agreements, again, Maureen tapped on this earlier, making sure that you're in compliance with your local municipalities for federal, state, and local regulations. And I think about Palm Beach County where I live. There's two municipalities within Palm Beach County that go above and beyond Miami-Dade building code. Just two, but there's a lot more responsibilities when I work in those two counties of what they're looking for in my paperwork. In the west coast of Florida, there's my least favorite municipality. After the hurricane passed 2 years ago, they went out into the community and started pulling asbestos samples from all of the debris that was left in the road from the condominium associations that were cleaning out the drywall. Fines for improper asbestos removal and disposal are hefty. And if you do it 3 times, it's actually a third-degree felony. So really important to know the details. I always recommend that every association keep an up-to-date asbestos report on file. So it's, what either you have it or you don't have it.
And let me tell you, the police, the fire department, they are all willing to go to your association and talk this through to the ownership. That's why they
Yeah.
say if you're in evacuation zone, like we don't want you guys here. So again, they are more than willing to come and coordinate and go on site and go ahead and provide that information to the membership.
Absolutely. It's a good point. And remember, they're there to support the community. They're there to help your association make things easier when things do happen. It's always great to know a local city official, a local police station, a local fire department. Your membership will appreciate you bringing in those types of resources. So we talked about a lot about the vendor readiness. Regular communication is really important. And this is a part of your pre-planning side. You need to know as an association what your communication plan looks like from a mitigation standpoint, from a reconstruction standpoint, and you establish that prior to. Are we doing a daily communication, a weekly communication? Who's getting that communication? Is it going only to the property manager and they're disseminating it? Is it going to the property manager and the board? What does that look like for your specific community's needs? And getting regular financial updates, I think, is one of the most important things for you to do at least on a weekly basis to help budget better for when we do have these issues. What are we at in cost this week? I think that that's not something you can't ask. And A good restoration contractor should be able to give what's called a ROM. It's a rough order magnitude of what we think this project is going to cost from a mitigation standpoint. And you want your adjuster and your restoration partner on site having that conversation together. Because if I'm on site and one of my favorite local adjusters, Brian Allen, I'm like, hey, Brian, I think this project's going to be 1.2 mil. He's like, I think it's going to be more like 900. I say to Brian, well, where do we need to meet in the middle? I can show you a couple things that I'm thinking, you show me a couple things you're thinking. So we're not having our client come out of pocket on extra expenses. That is my soapbox and why we want to know who that adjuster is from the carrier from day one. Because if we can come to an agreement of what we think this is going to cost and we're all on the same page, he's doing his job, we're doing our job, and the association is going to be as little out of pocket as humanly possible, minus deductibles, of course. We talked about having our vendor agreements, have multiple agreements. A backup plan to a backup plan to a backup plan is the what you need in a post-storm situation. Having relationships with a few roofers, having relationships with a few restoration contractors. We can't have a single point of failure when it comes to our agreements. Redundancy and flexibility is how you succeed there. My last big point in this one is training and drills. It's so important that anybody that's involved in the planning or the restoration of your property after a hurricane is well trained. You do drills, you're walking the property, and you know the role in which they are playing. So it's not the property manager doing everything. A property manager is one part of the puzzle. And again, anybody that is a portfolio property, it's so important that you have multiple hands, boots on the ground on site for this situation.